Welcome to the Trailhead from UltraSignup, where big adventures begin. Trail running is so much more than just a sport. It's a community, a culture, a way of seeing the world. On this show, we're not dissecting splits or debating shoe specs. We're here to get to the heart of it all, the people, the places, and the stories that speak to the soul of the sport. Join me, Zoë and my co-host Brendan Leonard, as we'll bring you conversations with the everyday athletes, local legends, quirky characters, and creative minds who make trail running what it is. Messy, joyful, gritty, and deeply human. Because it's not just about chasing finish lines. It's about the friendships forged on long climbs, the lessons learned in the pain cave, and the weird, wild moments that remind us why this sport is about so much more than the miles. This episode of The Trailhead is part of the UltraSignup podcast network, your home for the best stories, humor, and conversations in trail and ultra running. Start your run with The Trailhead with me and Brendan Leonard, a mix of humor, heart, and real runner questions. Go deep with the buzz with Buzz Burrell as the FKT legend breaks down the culture and ideas shaping endurance sports. And when you need a laugh, there's Between Two Pines, a running podcast for people who think running podcasts are kind of stupid. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, The Trailhead and The Buzz are now on YouTube. Find it all at ultrasignup.com/podcast. This episode of The Trailhead is brought to you by Element, the electrolyte drink mix that helps you stay hydrated and feel your best, no matter the season. A lot of runners think electrolytes are just for hot days, but here's the thing. When the temperature drops, you're still sweating and losing sodium, potassium, and magnesium, just a little more quietly. That's why even in cool weather, replacing electrolytes is key to keeping your energy up, avoiding cramps, and recovering faster after long runs and workouts. Element makes it simple with science-backed ratios and flavors that actually make you want to drink more water. My personal favorite lately is the mango chili, which is perfect after a crisp fall long run. Dialing in your hydration doesn't have to be complicated. And Element makes it easy, effective, and extremely tasty. Try a free sample pack at drinkelement.com/ultrasignup. That's drinkelement.com/ultrasignup. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about being a dad, Brendan, because today we're going to talk with Nick Thompson, and his book touches on being a dad a lot. And you had mentioned you're currently potty training your kid. That seems hard. Has ultra running uniquely prepared you for the challenges, both spiritual and physical, of having to deal with so much shit?
Okay.
Literal, physical, metaphorical.
I had a pretty healthy relationship with feces leading up to being a parent, but it's so much more. There's a lot of it. Do a lot of scrubbing. There's a lot. Anyway, I won't get into the details. But I interviewed 40 dads leading up to Jay being born and in the months afterward. I'm still working on this. Jay's 3. I'm trying to get this thing done by the time he turns 4, maybe. But Ed told me that the first weekend his wife left him alone with their first child, his daughter. It was she was maybe 12 weeks old. I'd have to go back and look, but he's like, I just looked at it it was like an ultra marathon, man. I just got to get to the next nap, and that was the next aid station, and then after that nap, we'll do stuff and I'll take care of things and I get to the next nap. It was you don't look at this whole thing like you got to get through 72 hours. You just look at it as, and I think of that quote often, less and less so now that Jay's 3. But when you're by yourself, you're like, okay, what do we have to do to make it to our next point, our next checkpoint? And I think, I don't know, there's more parallels between carrying a child to term and giving birth to me in my head for ultra runners. Some ultra runners who are capable of giving birth, unlike myself. But I think parenting can feel like that too. And it's you're come on, I have a pretty good relationship with pain, boredom, mundane things. I think I'll be okay. But, then there's all these things that are out of your control, such as your child's will to do things and irrationality, and you're just completely out of control. So Yeah, it has helped.
I'm curious, like, is there anything that you would want Jay to see in you or like take away from ultra running? So I'm imagining you don't conceal this habit. You guys just went to Chamonix, so he's at least like he's been exposed to the UTMB of it all. He's seen sort of like what the sport can be. Is there anything you would be particularly excited for him to absorb?
I guess like just like not shying away from hard things, not throwing up your hands and being like, okay, it's too hard. I can't do it. And that's kind of a pathology with me. So, to to a fault. But I just would like him to understand persistence and how
Mm.
it makes a lot of things possible in life, not just these contrived things that we do for fun that we pay someone $300 to let us do on the weekend.
Does he get to see that? Like, does he like crew you out of events? Is he at the finish line? Like how do you think he sees this as a kid, like putting yourself in his shoes?
I think he thinks I just run on Mount Sentinel, which is like this mountain at the end of our street, and he calls it Mountain Sentinel, or he used to.
Oh.
Yeah. But like, he's like, Dad, you gonna go for a run? I'm like, yeah, bud. And he's like, going up Mount Sentinel? I'm like, yeah, I guess so, man. Why not? But yeah, no, yeah, I've tried to write about this, about like finish lines and what you think you should do on a finish line. And like, I have never, like barely crossed a finish line and let with like near death. I always want to have enough left to either carry him in or run in with him if I can. And I think that's it's such a special time for me that he is there and thinks it's fun. Like, who knows how soon it'll be where he'd be like, whatever, Dad, who cares? Dumb race you do.
I'm always so impressed by parents like you, and like especially moms who do these ultras and then they finish and they're holding their kid of whatever size, whatever age, or they cross the finish line, like holding hands with their kids. My concern is like, how do we let the kids know that like this isn't normal and your parent is in fact a badass, right? Like, does your parent have normal friends? Are you exposed to the fact that like a lot of people go to Topgolf on the weekend? Like, how do we communicate that to the kids, Because like, I'm always worried that like, you see your mom finishing UTMB or like dad's doing Javelina. Like, they need to talk to the other kids at daycare and be like, yeah, Mom finished a puzzle this weekend, or like Dad made it to the dry cleaners and that was it.
It's not like it's cool, to a teenager. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited because we both just read the book, The Running Ground by Nick Thompson, which talks a lot about dads and sons and how that relates to running. So let's dive into the interview.
Yeah, psyched.
If you're looking for a run that feels like a love letter to the Bay Area trails, look no further than the Peacock Gap Trail Run at China Camp State Park. Once home to a thriving Chinese shrimp fishing village, this place still hums with history and wild beauty, from tangled forests giving way to sweeping views of Mount Tam, the San Pablo Bay, and the San Francisco skyline. Every course, whether you're running the 10K, half marathon, or 30K, packs in buttery single track, a punchy climb about 1.5 miles in, and just enough challenge to make the descents feel like flight. Expect quiet coastal woods, the chatter of wild turkeys, and that rare California magic where redwoods meet salt air. This is one of the few chances you'll get to race inside of China Camp, and it fills up fast. So lace up, bring your friends, and come see why the Peacock Gap Run is one of the Bay Area's hidden gems. Happens Saturday, September 6th at China Camp State Park in San Rafael, California. Sign up now at ultrasignup.com.
I'm Nick Thompson. I'm CEO of The Atlantic and the author of The Running Ground.
So something that I found really interesting about how you described your relationship with running, particularly in your book, The Running Ground, is you sort of started running twice. Once as a younger person, as a kid, and then you sort of refound running in mid-age. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into running both times and what you learned between those two sort of like rekindling that running love affair?
Kind of got into running maybe 3 or 4 times, but it's, I started when I was 5. I was about to divorce my mom. Started training for marathons. And he'd never been an athletic guy, but it was the running boom. It was the late 1970s, early 1980s. And he would take me out and we'd run a mile, maybe run 2 miles. Quite know. I really wish I had Strava back then because I actually think I may have run 3 miles, but now that I've had a 5-year-old, that seems crazy. In any case, so I ran with my father and then I stopped. And then the second time I picked it up was in high school when I got cut from the basketball team, which was quite embarrassing. And the only team you could join was the track team. And so I did that and then turned out I was good. And then you could say I kind of picked it up again in my 20s.
If you learned anything like between those two sort of like starts and restarts with running, like, is there anything you did different or anything you learned or just had to relearn?
You mean between when I started in high school and when I restarted in my 20s?
Yes.
Yeah. The thing I had to relearn was that I was good. So when I ran in high school, I started out and I didn't think I was particularly good and I wasn't. And then I became quite good. I went to college and I wasn't good enough. And I stopped. And when I started again in my 20s and I started running marathons, I set my expectations way too low. I felt like it was almost as though my confidence had been broken by not being good enough. But there's no reason why I should have set sort of my mental limits where I put them. I had the sense that like all that was possible is like maybe I could run a sub 3-hour marathon, and then I wasn't able to do it. Right, I failed 6 or 7 times. But like I don't know, I have been one of the fastest kids in New England when I was in high school. Like my peers were running 2 hours and 18 minutes. Right, I could have gone much faster, and I don't know why I didn't have this sense that I could be fast again. And of course, it took me until my mid 40s to really figure it out.
As a good segue, I think you just turned 50 this year.
I did. I turned 50. Yep. I celebrated by trying to run a sub 5-minute mile on my 50th birthday.
Oh, okay. Not my question, but I was going to say, yeah. One of the themes of the book and of some of your online writing that is about running is the idea of aging, and obviously we're all aging. And you've just used the word good to describe yourself as a runner, as a younger person. How are you still thinking in those terms of the word good, and how has that definition changed in the last few years?
Oh, do I still think that I'm good?
Yeah.
Do
you care, right? I guess, actually, is a good question about being good.
Unfortunately, I do. I don't care whether I'm good. I'd like to think that at this point in my life, I could reach kind of a level of Zen satisfaction and, be able to run without concern for outcome and just care about the process. Like yesterday, I watched my kid play the soccer game, and he plays on a very elite soccer team, and they lost 2-1. I was like, well, at least, everybody played well. And he was like, yeah, whatever. And I wish that with my running, I were able to just view every race and every challenge as an effort to reach self-transcendence and a quest for deeper understanding. And that is there. And that is more a part of what the sport does for me than it used to do. But I still I don't know. I was really trying to set the American record of the 50 mile this past April. I'm still trying to go for times, go for records. If I'm running a race and, there's someone ahead of me and there's 100 meters to go, I might be kicking kind of hard.
Do you foresee yourself like trying to have the fastest finishing time in the New York City Marathon for a 70-year-old in 20 years from now?
It's an interesting question, right? Because there are 2 things that could prevent that from happening. So one would be real emotional growth on my part.
I thought you were going to say death. I was like, well, yeah, it comes for us all.
Personal development.
So there's the possibility of real emotional growth where I will stop caring. The more likely scenario is that it's like I will break down at some point, right? Like it will just become, the people who win the New York City Marathon for the age 70 group are usually not people who've been running hard in their 50s. Just like if you look at me, like I'm doing better than my classmates at Stanford University, not because I have more natural talent, but because I didn't blow out my legs in my teens and 20s, right? There's the amount of wear and tear on my body is much less than my teammates who were better than me back then and kept going. And so I do wonder whether by the time I'm 70, I will have injured myself or, there'll have been some other issue. Or the other thing that happens is you eventually tire of the goals you have, right? It no longer is exciting and satisfying. And it's hard, particularly in a marathon. Ultra roads are different because time matters on that particular day, on that particular course, but you can't really compare. Marathon time really does matter because 2:45 is very different from 2:35. It's hard to go backwards. And so, when I'm 70 and I'm running whatever I'm running, I don't even know what the top 70-year-olds run. They run like 3:10s, 3 hours. I don't know whether it will be as fun as like right now trying to run whatever I'm trying to run.
You have this sort of like lovely description of what you thought aging through running was like in your book versus what your actual experience has been like. And you said that you used to think of it as like summiting a mountain is like you build, and then there's one good day and then it's all downhill from there, which is exactly how I at the ripe old age of 32 have been thinking about it, with like a lot of anxiety and horror. But then you say that your actual experience of aging through running is much more like these lovely rolling hills that each of them has its own sort of distinctive view. I'm curious what those views are. Like, what are those things that you see or experience along the way that make the sort of bumpy ride of aging, more exciting or more tolerable?
Well, one of the cool things that I found as I've aged is you accumulate wisdom, right? You learn how to train, you figure things about your body, right? You figure out how to interpret injury signals and the things that slow you down. And so, my fastest marathon was when I was 44. And now that I'm 50, it's likely that will be my lifetime record. Maybe not, but it's likely to be my lifetime record. But I had thought when I was 44, there was no chance that I would run as fast as I did when I was 35. So you learn things. You learn things about how to train. You learn things about what to eat. You learn things about how to recover. But you also can set different goals and you can find different things. I discovered ultra running, in sort of a very narrow sense when I was 45, 46, and in a much deeper sense when I was 49, 50. There are new things out there. This is an infinitely complicated sport with infinite opportunities to test yourself and find your limits and explore new places, both physically and mentally. And so as you age, you can set new targets and new goals and go new places.
I was just going to pitch you on more ultra marathons as you age, but you've done,
I'm
headed in that direction.
Wait until
unless my body breaks down.
Even then, I think it's still doable.
Show me an ultra runner with a non-broken-esque body.
I was just reading about that the one I want to do is the, I don't know what it's called, the Lazarus Lake race, where it's how far can you run, but you get an hour for every year old you are.
Yeah.
Right. So now I get 50 hours and Zoe only gets 32 and I crush her.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah.
Maybe not. It's my chance.
I did laugh when I was reading your book. I was reading it on a phone, on the Kindle app on my phone, in
the way it was meant to be experienced
in Chamonix as the UTMB is going on. I know. I was just like, God, this is the word. I'm really dedicated here. Look at this. But the two sentences were, technically an ultra marathon is any race longer than a marathon, and a 50K perhaps shouldn't count. It's like someone who boasts of wanting to see the world beyond America and then goes to Toronto. Do you stand behind that? Like, do you still feel that way?
I'm glad, I wrote that sentence and it made me laugh. And no one who's read the book has commented on it or thought about it. No one who edited it even put haha in the comments. Like, it's a very small community of people that will like really appreciate that joke. And I'm just honored, Brendan, that you like that sentence. And I stand by it absolutely. And in part because when I first ran my first 50K, I was like, oh my God, like, how am I going to do this? Right? Like, body can only hold 2,000 carbohydrates. It seemed like so long. And now it's like I run 30 miles like every other weekend, not quite, but probably like 15 times a year I run 31 miles just on a whim or a workout.
Yeah.
The accidental ultra.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are no races that are like 26.5 miles. Nobody's like, hey, come run this ultra marathon.
Right. Right.
Maybe we should start one.
Yeah. The world's shortest ultra marathon.
The world's shortest.
I
it's an amazing
you get
race.
Your belt buckle, you show up, you run 26.4. We celebrate you for going longer than a marathon. It's the pinnacle of human achievement. Yeah.
Yeah, and then people can say, oh yeah, I'm an ultra runner now.
I'm an ultra runner.
I did put this in a book. I was like I I've figured out what the weight or how many French fries were in like a large fry or a medium French fries. And then was like, if you add only this many French fries to it, then it becomes an ultra French fry, this is like the 50K of French fries. Right. You wouldn't even notice really if it was a thing of French fries.
And I'm not even sure that my flat 50 milers count as ultras. I think they do. I mean, they technically do, but like emotionally, do they? Like I just ran the Twisted Branch 100K. That's an ultra, right? Like that's the mountains. That's like, but is the 50 mile around a lake, 7 laps around a 7-mile lake? I don't know.
Semantics.
Semantics. What is that? Yeah. What is that like emotional sort of like threshold for you of when you're like, I'm doing it, I'm running an ultra, and this is when it starts?
I think I've only really run 2, which is Twisted Branch 100K. And that's both times when I've woken up at 3 a.m. and like start guns in an hour, like get your food in, pack your tent, then it's felt like an ultra. When you're putting on a headlamp, I guess if the goal is, it was once described to me as an ultra, a real ultra is anytime, I've heard a couple definitions. One is a real ultra is a race where you have to get your hair cut. Second is it's a race where you see the sunrise twice. But I feel like it's any race where your goal is to finish in the daylight as opposed to the nighttime. Where if that distinction matters, then you're probably running an ultra.
I feel like anytime the word day becomes a part of the equation, when you start thinking less in hours and more in like the larger part of a day, that feels pretty ultra-esque to me.
Yeah, that seems right.
But agree, headlamp feels very ultra. For me, there's like a lubricant threshold for ultra. How many like weird bags of food am I packing becomes ultra.
Maybe mine would be the aid stations. Like, what is actually being served? Because like most marathons, you're not like, oh, should I take Chips Ahoy or Oreos here? It's like, maybe they got some half bananas and like some electrolyte drink, but it's not. You're not like, oh,
or like ultras in Europe where it's a straight up charcuterie board and they have like cold cuts and like artisanal sausage and like boar stew and fresh baked bread. It's like, do you guys have any intention to run, or are we just hanging out and eating soup?
It's really just a fast buffet. That's what it is.
It's a fast buffet.
Nick, in reading the book too, like one of the questions I had was, so there are some sort of lead-ins to some chapters where you're having conversations with different, I think maybe all of your kids at one point, right? Like there would be these weird conversations where like, and it leads into the chapter, and they're very dad versus kid. Dad's doing this weird thing. Does it affect you at all? Does it inspire you? Whatever. Were you actively thinking, I need to get some material for the book, or these things just happen and you were just kind of like, I'm going to write this down and see if it's useful sometime?
A couple were, so one was my favorite one, which is when I asked my son, James, who was then, I think 9, I was like, how much do you think I train? He's like, it's 35 hours a week. And I was like, when do you think I train? He's like, well, you train a lot, when I'm asleep and I'm away. And I was like, do you think I should train more or train less? And he's like, you should train much more when I'm asleep and I'm away, and you should never train when I'm at home, which was like, it was kind of cool because it was like, it kind of got across this point that there is this burden on your family life and the rest of your life of training. The kids notice it. They're not dumb. But also my kids like want me to be great, right? Like they think it's cool that I'm a good runner and they want me to be better.
Cool might be a stretch, not to interrupt, but like,
yeah, but like it's like, it's more interesting than other parts of my life.
Yes.
But they want me to succeed. So that one just happened. The other ones, I like sat down with them and I was like, hey, I want to talk to you guys about running. Do you want to be interviewed for my book? Like they've heard me do interviews. I don't know when it started, but they've obviously listened in on me do like hundreds of interviews. Sometimes they've sat there, like they've been in the room. Sometimes they're like just playing on FIFA and I'm on the phone interviewing somebody. So they've, the concept of dad interviewing someone is a pretty familiar concept. And so I was like, why don't I interview you guys? And so that's where I think a couple of them came from too.
So sort of to that point in your book, you weave in the stories of other runners as well throughout your own sort of memoir. I'm curious, could you describe the structure of your book for us and tell us why you chose to do that?
Yeah. So the structure of the book was really hard because I'm telling my story. I'm telling my father's story. I'm trying to get in a really deep understanding of the physiology of running. And then I didn't want it to feel just like a memoir. I also wanted to bring in these other characters who illustrate other elements of life. So that all sounds great, right? And when I was describing the book before I started writing it, I was like, well, I could have these 5 different elements. The problem is like stories work better if they're chronological. And my life and my father's life, of course, don't line up. Like, what am I going to do? Make the first third of the book his life, right? And then there are these runners who their lives are important. I tell the first runner I read about is Bobby Gibb, and she's the first one to run the Boston Marathon. Well, I interviewed her in 2018, and she was born in 1942. Like, where am I going to put her life together? Where am I going to put it there? And so I eventually came upon this structure where the book is largely chronological. It begins with a chapter in which I describe a very important race when I was 32. And the point of that structure is to introduce kind of this is who I am. I want you to care about me. I want you to care about running as a sport. If you don't think you care about running as a sport, I'm going to tell you like what went on in my mind in this race, and I will try to convince you that this sport is interesting. And if I fail, give the book back to the librarian and go pick something else off your bed, right? That's the beginning. Then after that, it's my father's life and my life juxtaposed, where it's his life up to the time he spent at Phelps Academy at Andover. And then it's my time at Phelps Academy at Andover. And then it's his time at Stanford, and it's my time at Stanford. There's this nice parallelism. And then he travels on a chronological track. I travel on a chronological track. He dies. And then eventually I bring him back in by kind of stepping out of the chronology, by describing things that happened in his past in my chronology when I learned about them. So I can put a thing that happened to him in 1980 in the part of the book that is 2020 if I learned about it in 2020. So that's that. Then there are these 5 characters. The first of whom is Bobby Gibb. Second of whom is, so Bobby Gibb's the first woman to run the Boston Marathon. He's an ultra runner. Second is Tony Ruiz, who was my coach in the Central Park Track Club, an elite Puerto Rican athlete who almost made the Puerto Rican Olympic team and then struggled with drug addiction. Running helps him process getting clean through it. Then there's Julia Lucas, this incredibly smart, thoughtful peer of mine who almost made the United States Olympic team and came as close as you can come and not make it. Then there's Michael Westphal, the fastest marathoner in the world with Parkinson's. And then there's Super Babekjord, who 9 years in a row wins the 3,100-mile race. And all of them intersect with my life. And so the way they come into the narrative is when they enter my life. So Bobby is the mother of a friend of mine in high school. So she comes in at high school graduation when my drunken father crashes the stage after I win an award. Tony is my coach when I turn 30. So he comes in when I turn 30. Julia is a friend of mine in my 40s. So she comes in right about 40 when we meet. Michael Westphal, I meet when he is running a race against my son, or is running a race in which he is right behind my son. And I can see him with his Parkinson's flailing all over the road. And I'm concerned about him. And then I realize that he's actually a legendary runner who's run 2:29. And then Super Babekjord comes in when I go and start watching the 3,100-mile race in Queens, which happens when I'm discovering ultra running. So all of these people whose lives are cover different parts of the second half of the 20th century, in the early parts of the 21st, they all come into the book when their life intersects with mine. So that allows me to keep a chronological thread of my life through the book. So without question, it was like a math puzzle, making the structure work. And in fact, I interviewed tons of people. I was trying to find people who I knew, who my life has crossed with, who tell you something interesting about pain and life through running. Right. And I settled on these 5 because they're amazing and because they fit with the narrative I was telling.
Was this
I love it. It's such a interesting structure for, so often running memoirs can sort of be this like flat thing where it's like, I started running and then overcame XYZ obstacle through the power that becoming tough and an ultra bestowed upon me. And having the lens of other people's lives, like I felt like I learned things and got to like have a really intimate connection with your experience with running as well. Not
That's
a question, just feedback.
I'll take it because I like it. So thank you. That's nice. But that's what I was hoping for.
Were you? Is this like when you're figuring this out? Are you just like Post-it notes on a big wall somewhere and like rearranging things and moving them around, or how are you doing this?
Yeah, I had a doc. And it was like a chronology doc. And I was like moving pieces around the hard part was that for a while I had drafts where the characters weren't discrete sections, where they came into different chapters and then left. And that didn't work. And then eventually I basically created a chronology map of the entire book with every fact about myself, every fact about my father, and every fact about the characters. And I tried to structure it so that it was as clean a line as possible.
Oh,
and I cheat like twice in the book. Um, I'll tell you, like, there's like one thing I couldn't reconcile, which is I really needed to. The race with Michael Westphal happened in 2021, and that's when I met him, or maybe it's the summer of 2022. Um, but it for complicated reasons, it had to come before I tell the story of COVID, right? And so I move into that chapter. There's nothing that's factually incorrect. I don't make it clear exactly what year it is that race is. If you're a very keen reader, you'll see that I've jumped ahead slightly more than you might think. But otherwise, it's a very, and that was a problem I couldn't resolve. Otherwise, it's a very pure chronology, which I think, I worked at the New Yorker for 6 years. Like, I remember when I showed up at the New Yorker, they're like, there are lots of ways to draft a story, right? You can have jump cuts, you can move around, and there are many ways to start, and there's one way to finish, which is chronological. And so it really helps. And so the book was a real struggle to make it as simple as possible for people to read. Really hard to make it simple to follow. I worked really hard to make it short. I worked really hard to make sure that like all of the details of my life tie back to running. That was the challenge.
So, I think one of the really moving and challenging sort of stories in your book is you talk about navigating a cancer diagnosis and how that influenced your relationship with running. Can you tell us the story of your sort of your cancer incident, and that's not the word I want to use, your cancer diagnosis, and how that influenced how you went forward with running?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I'll get to this at the end of the story, but it is the reason I wrote the book was because of a realization relating to this. So I start running in my 20s. I'm not very good. And then I get good and I run a 2:43 marathon when I'm 30. And then immediately afterwards, like 2 weeks later, I go and I see the doctor. He finds a lump. Eventually it leads, to multiple surgeries. You can still see the line, thyroid cancer. And I go through this very hard treatment. And it's not hard for cancer treatments. Like if you're going to get cancer, this is the cancer you want, but getting cancer at 30 is hard. And getting it after a marathon made it ineluctably tied to my running. And, you go through the treatments, you go through radiation therapy, and you get out and you're pretty weak and can't walk around the block. And I became obsessed with running again. And, in fact, trying to run as fast as I had run before I got sick. And so then I, go through the process. And 2 years later, I run another 2:43 at the New York Marathon. So sort of a clean 2-year cycle. I run 2:43.51 in 2005, 2:43.38 in 2007. And so it's this amazing sense where I feel like, okay, I've now proven that I am alive. I am going to keep living because I have now run as fast as I had run before I got sick. So then the really interesting thing that happens, which I don't figure out for 15 years, I then run basically the same time for the next decade. I think I run 2:42, 2:42, 2:45, 2:43, 2:46. There's like one 2:51 in there, but that was a year where I didn't even think I was going to run it because my kids was born, and then I just ran on a whim. But anyway, I run if you take my average time of 15 marathons, they're like, it's all 2:43. And so this gets interesting because then in my 40s, I run 2:29. And part of what inspired the book is I was like, gosh, I wonder how did I go? Because I tried really hard to go faster. Like, why was I stuck at 2:43? And then I was able to run 2:29 when I was so much older. And then it was like one day when I was running, and I described this in the book, running across the Brooklyn Bridge, just having this realization, I didn't believe I could go faster than I had gone before I got sick. Like, in a way, I didn't want to go faster. Like, all I cared about was being as fast as I'd been before I got sick. And it was the realization that in some deep way, the recovery from the cancer had held me back from reaching my potential that made me think, wow, running is a really psychologically interesting sport. I should try to get deeper into this and figure out more about why, the times I've gone fast, the times I've gone slow. So in some ways, it was like the response to the cancer was the inspiration that triggered the whole process that made me write this book.
Was there... I think the first time I ever heard about any part of your story was this Wired magazine piece you wrote in 2020 to run my best marathon at age 44. I had to outrun my past.
Yeah.
Are you at this time, are you starting to think this is a book? Is this part of the book that is in this Wired article?
Well, the Wired story was definitely what inspired the book. So what happened is I wrote the Wired article, and it like didn't get more readers than other things I'd written, right? I'd written other things for Wired that had many more readers, but like the number of people who wrote to me, they were like, my God, I love this. This moved me. It was kind of the best received thing I'd ever written. And so I thought, maybe I should like expand this. And so I took that Wired story that was in the March or April of 2020, and turned it into a book proposal, which I then sold 6 months later. And then, 5 years later, 4 years later, here's the book. 5 years later, 5 years later,
Yeah.
God, took a long time to write this thing.
Some people take longer.
Yeah.
Yes, as you know. Yeah.
So-
this is out of nowhere, but there's this one section that I put in my notes, and this is a quote from the book, and this is not the beginning of the book, nor does it have much to do with anything in the book. But at one point, I was kidnapped by drug dealers in Morocco who held me for 24 hours before deciding I would be useless as an international drug mule. My father had spent part of his first African sojourn in a Ghanaian jail. I spent part of mine locked in a bathroom outside of Tangier. And this is just like basically a footnote in the story, in your story.
Yeah,
It's
not
like,
your
right, so-
typical running story fodder,
like you do,
like, as one does.
Well, I mean, this was kind of interesting because when I first wrote it, my first draft, I had like a couple paragraphs about the kidnapping incident. And I remember I ended up having 3 editors on the book because they sort of shifted at Random House. And it was with my second editor, this woman named Hillary. And she was like, well, this is interesting, Nick, but like, what does this have to do with your book, right? Like, what does this have to do with running? And it was a comment she sort of made throughout the manuscript, which is, that's an interesting moment in your life. Like, that's an interesting thing that happened, but what does it have to do with anything, right? Like, in fact, right? Like, they're major, there's, I have like all kinds of fascinating things that have happened that have nothing to do with the book, right? I don't know. I was just telling someone, I wrote a long New Yorker essay about my long friendship with Svetlana Stalin, right? Which is part of my investigation into the Cold War. Like she's not mentioned. The Cold War is barely mentioned, right? Like stuff that was really important in my life and that I spent years working on is not relevant there. I ended up keeping a sentence about the kidnapping because it was just showing the way that my life was parallel to my father's, right? And the point about him getting arrested in Ghana was pretty important to his intellectual development. And, it was kind of just sort of this weird parallel that like at the same age, I had been kidnapped as he had been arrested me in North Africa, him in West Africa. So I kept it as a sentence, but yeah, it's this funny dynamic where you're writing a book about running and it's a memoir, but it's not a memoir, right? Like nobody actually cares about most of my life. And so, there are very few, there are many major biographical incidents that are like not in the book.
And it seems like if the Wired article is the genesis of the book idea, it seems like your father's story was always going to be part of it, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, my father's story is like deeply tied into it because he taught me to run, right? Like I ran with him. He was, and then, his life, which is this, exciting, amazing, brilliant disaster is I make a commitment to running in my 40s in part because I'm like so concerned about ending like him, right? I do not want to, my father, like you guys have read the book, you know what happens, but he, at one point, John F. Kennedy says this young guy is going to be president. By the end of his life, he's running a male brothel in Southeast Asia, right? Like it's a big shift. And, I make a commitment to try to not be him by running. I had this conversation once with my sister. We were driving a U-Haul from my dad's house, and we were both said to each other, like, our biggest fear in life is becoming our fathers. And so part of the book is about using running. He brought me into running. He helped me run, and then I used running to try to not be him.
Right. Like it was sort of, maybe a bit of a tether in the chaos of his life, but for you, it sort of functioned as this like really important source of structure and order.
Yeah.
How did running sort of provide that scaffolding particularly in your 40s after the cancer diagnosis?
So I don't know. It's probably maybe somebody else would have to like see through me more than I can see through myself. But I do feel that the kind of the stoic, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to run every day. I'm going to run no matter what the weather is. I'm going to run no matter like how much work I have, I've had very intense jobs for the last 20 years. And I just, every day that I'm not injured. I find time to run. I find time to run. It like builds up this habit. It also provides a break and a moment of clarity. I've lived in Brooklyn and Manhattan. I live in like one of the densest cities in the world, and it gives me a chance to be outside. It gives me a chance to connect. I have, a job that means I have very little free time. Like it does a lot of very important mental and emotional functions in my life. And then I also think it encourages really good habits. And when my father lost it, he also lost so many of the other habits in his life. And he became this chaos machine. And he didn't become a chaos machine because he stopped running, right? I mean, that's an oversimplification, right? He became a chaos machine because he couldn't handle his sexuality. He's dealing with the suicide of his friend. He's an alcoholic, right? He has there's 100 other explanations, but I do also think he held his life together through running through a good portion of it.
Totally. That resonates. Like if I didn't have running, I feel like I'd be in a fight club for sure. Wouldn't be good.
Yeah. It can be very useful.
Yeah. There's definitely a passage I remember from the book where you talk about the weight of spending an hour running per day versus spending an hour being a dad and showing up in other ways. And I was impressed with your run commute, which I think is a really, really underrated, underperformed thing in American culture because we're worried about showing up to the office sweaty or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you just say like the nuts and bolts of it? How does it work for you? I know you explain this in the book, but
no, it's super important, and I can I can demonstrate, right? So for people who are watching on video, have this, I have like a bunch of clothes I hang right there. Right? So I have outfits. I have like some drawers, put on a little backpack, right? And I'll put my keys, my wallet, my cell phone. If I need like an extra pair of socks or belt, this morning I brought a shirt in my backpack. And then I'll just go and I'll run. It's like 4 miles. And sometimes if I can leave a little early or I don't have a meeting till a little bit late, maybe I'll make it 6. I have a membership at a gym around the corner. So you go to the gym, you shower, you get back in your nasty clothes, which some people don't like, and then you change in a phone booth in the office, right? And like it's been variations on that, and like parts of it are kind of risky. Like I used to change behind a plant in the corner at the New Yorker, but like no one ever noticed. You like, there's always a place to change. There's always a place to keep your clothes. And there's like, there risks. Like there are definitely days where I've like, I don't know, I've had to like give a talk in a suit and I only have tube socks, right? Or, where your clothes don't quite match or where you show up. I like, it doesn't always work, but like it's life, right? And so I've commuted for 20 years.
I feel like very core to our mission at the Trailhead is trying to promote run commuting, and is a huge part of that, normalizing being really gross at work and making the world your changing room.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say normalize being gross at work. I mean, like you don't want to, you don't ever want to smell or be sweaty, right? But like, it's okay if you walk into the office in your shorts, right?
Yes.
And as long as you don't ever offend anybody or make somebody uncomfortable by changing, like then it's okay, right? And there's always like a bathroom. You can close the door. I don't know.
Don't want to be the second journalist to like very publicly flash David Remnick.
Well, I was not expecting that reference in this interview, but yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Good job working that in. So
here for the Jeffrey Toobin drops.
Yeah.
So I never was like, the thing is that one of the funny things is a lot of the time that I was doing this, I was at Condé Nast, and Condé Nast is a place that cares about clothes. But what is interesting is that I did it in the beginning when I was, a junior employee, and I did it at the end when I was a boss. I don't think no one ever sort of complained in any side way or ever like said, Nick, don't do this. I think most people just thought it was kind of a cool, efficient hack. And like I live in New York, so there are gyms, like you're never more than 3 blocks from a gym. So the office moves, you just get a new membership.
And, sort of touching on that, you sort of alluded to this earlier, that you've had some pretty intense jobs working at the New Yorker, working at Wired. You're now CEO of the Atlantic. How do you balance training and competing at such a high level with also journalisming at such a high level?
Journalisming is an amazing word. I love that. Well, in some ways they're additive, right? I do think that nobody works 24 hours a day, right? You need moments of break. And so in some ways running is my break. It does allow me to process thoughts and it does allow me to, go through things. And if I'm working, in moments where if I'm working on a really intense story, I will, listen to recordings of my interviews while I run. It'll give me a chance to process them. But I also just think that life is complicated. We all do different things, and you try to do as best you can at all of them. It's possible that if I had not run, right, and had not like taken up the sport and had like spent an extra hour a day being a journalist, I would be a better journalist, right? Maybe. But it's also possible that I'd be a worse journalist, and that I found like I've kind of created a balance. And there are definitely times where the running gives, right? Where like training would say I should probably run 12 miles, but work means I only run 2. Right. There are definitely times where training would say you should be running at 7:30 pace. And all I can do is like 9:30 pace because I'm actually on a Zoom call trying to like make it seem like I'm not like sweating, right? Or like breathing too hard. You just I just try to make it work as best you can.
In the, there's a lot about efficiency and optimization and doing well at 2 things. Is there anything you're like really inefficient or bad at? Off the top of your
there's
head?
tons of stuff. There's tons of stuff that I don't think there's anything like I'm super inefficient at, but there are lots of things I'm bad at. Like I'm not, like my kids would give you like an infinite list. Like I'm a bad cook, right? And I wish I had spent more time like learning how to be a good cook, right? It'd be very healthy and useful, and it's a good part of parenting. And there are millions of things that, and like I have definitely one of the things that has suffered is I don't barely watch TV, right? And like, so there's like all these like cultural references and musical references, and there's like these big gaps in my mind. Like Harry Styles ran a sub 3-hour marathon. I am aware that Harry Styles is a musician. I could not tell you. I couldn't tell you the first thing about Harry Styles. Like I just don't know anything. Like there are all of these gaps in my knowledge where if I had spent more time like watching TV and doing this, you would know so much more about lots of stuff.
Game of Thrones overrated, Sopranos underrated. There you go.
I did watch
20 years.
I did watch The Wire. I don't know, like there's just sort of gaps in my knowledge. But whatever, there's trade-offs. And sometimes like last night I watched The Pursuit of Happiness while doing like planks with my 15-year-old, right? So I guess the serious thing, like, and this is one of the things that I am good at, and I think is a useful efficiency hack, is kind of like productive multitasking, right? I consider running to work multitasking, right? I'm doing the commute and I'm doing the run. If I'm running to work and I'm listening to a podcast, I am like probably listening to an important AI podcast, right? So then I'm advancing my knowledge of AI. I'm actually like, triple tasking, right? If I'm watching a movie, like I'm often like on the exercise bike, or I'm like doing whatever core exercises I need to be doing to like catch up, right? I often like the best form of multitasking is, I've gone to, I don't know, I've had 6 work trips to Europe in the last 6 months. Every single one, I brought one of my kids, right? And I figured out how to work them in and like get them conference passes and they love it, right? And they get to go to cool places. And there are things you miss out, like you miss out on I made a deal with my son. He like loves restaurants. He really wanted to go to this restaurant in Copenhagen. So I thought, great. And so I agreed to go to a tech conference in Copenhagen. It's like the deal. Like if you guys get me a reservation at this restaurant, I'll go to Copenhagen and I'll talk about AI at your conference. And I bring my son, and then you miss out a little. You miss like the networking dinner, right? But you have an amazing time with your son, right? So it's work. It's worth it. It's this great form of putting things together.
Yes, that's great. Great answer.
So I'm curious, are there other ways though? Like it seems like there have been times where your running and your writing do overlap, and obviously this book represents a huge overlap in the middle of that Venn diagram. But I'm curious if there are other ways that they inform one another.
I think they do. I do think that Haruki Murakami has talked about how a lot of like his best sentences came to him when he's running. Catherine Schultz, who was the, one of the best stylists at the New Yorker who I worked with, used to run, and she would go over sentences in her mind when she ran. And so sometimes I would do that. So when I was writing the book, I would often think about, I would go out on a run and I would try to like think through what a complicated issue is, or something that I needed to sort through in the book, or how to phrase something. And I'll do that in my work too, right? If I have a complicated HR decision, I will, like, when I go for a run, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to think through this. There are ways that they're complementary in that way. I do think that the habits of discipline that you pick up in running are complementary to work, and work influences, you can become more disciplined through your work. You can become more disciplined through your running. You can learn how to concentrate for 2 hours straight, either in like Zoom calls or in, workouts. So there are lots of ways that they do intersect and overlap and help each other. But they also can get in each other's way. I mean, this is like one of the things that I do think is important, and it's not a huge part of the book, but I do mention is that running can it's not an unambiguous good for the rest of your life, right? Like it can make you selfish, right? It can make you really boring, right? What is the best way to or what is the joke? How do you find out what a marathoner's time is at a cocktail party? Don't worry, they'll tell you, right? Like you can become self-centered and self-absorbed, and you can become difficult for the people who love you. Like there are lots of spouses who quite resent their partners running. Like there's a lot of stuff that can happen. And so you just have to be really aware of that. And, I've been relatively fortunate that I don't train that much, right? I don't train that much. I don't travel that much for running. I've been able to work it into my life, and I'm still married to the same woman I've been married to for, we've been together now for 30 years. So it's working all right.
Yeah. Makes that advice go just a little bit further for sure.
Yeah.
And she's very happy. Yes.
I mean, I think that she, honestly, if she were here and she were given truth serum, I think her answer would be that she, in the short term, often wishes I didn't go running and finds it annoying. But in the long term, recognizes the mental health benefits and the physical benefits that come to me. And so therefore is glad I do it. That'd be my guess.
Like Nick's running might be annoying, but Nick Sans running might be extremely annoying.
Oh, yeah.
Very well put, Zoe. That might be exactly what she'd say.
Or intolerable. Yeah.
Intolerable.
But it also it's interesting because the running is it does do all these, I get these mental health benefits, right? But I also think that she knows that it sets a very good example for the kids, right? Because the kids don't understand how hard I work, right? Maybe they're starting to understand it now, but they don't get, if you're 11 years old, you maybe your dad is CEO of the Atlantic, whatever, that sounds impressive, but who cares? You don't understand it, right? And I'm at the office, and so they don't know, right? But they do know how hard I run, and they can watch the workouts, right? And now they're starting to do the workouts and see the workouts, and they have a much more visceral understanding of the kind of the discipline and the effort. And so there's a useful lesson. We were talking about, my wife and I had a really interesting conversation where there's there's a part at the end of the book where I talk about, I was like, well, I'm curious how my kids will think of the sport. And I mentioned that 2 of my 3 sons have taken to it. One, they're both soccer players, but they both kind of run on the side. One joined his track team and turned out to be really good. The other runs during soccer practice and turns out to be really good. And then I was mentioning my 3rd kid, and I was like, well, and he used to run 200s on the track with me. And she's like, that was a tiny thing. But look at how he does his homework, right? And he's pulling that from you, right? Look how hard he works every night. And maybe that's driven by himself, but maybe it's also partly observing mom and dad working really hard at what they do, whether it's, at their jobs or at their hobbies.
There's a section in the book, this is one of the things I copied out about where you talk about this exact thing. And I think there's this old movie from late 80s or early 90s called City Slickers, where Billy Crystal and his work buddies go to a dude ranch, but he's having this midlife crisis. And it's right after he's gone to his son's, I think, elementary school to do Parents' Day. And this guy gets up before him and is a construction worker and tells the story about, I forget what somebody's getting crushed or something like that. And the kids are just enthralled. And then Billy Crystal gets up and is doesn't know how to explain his job selling radio advertising. And he's in the kitchen with his wife later. And he's like, they don't know what I do. What do I do? I sell air. And I think of all of our kids, they don't, my son has never seen me work because it always takes place on a laptop or an iPad.
Right.
But I can't really tell him he's 3, but he gets running. He understands it. And poor kid where he's grabs trekking poles and is I'm running. And I'm like, oh no.
Oh no.
He thinks running is done with poles.
That's
Oh,
funny.
no.
That's
Oh,
amazing.
God.
That's amazing.
But that's
It's too late for him.
It was just that summer, whatever I was training for.
And when they see you on the laptop, they don't know if you're working or if you're wasting time, right?
No, yeah.
But you're out running, they realize that that's something that's kind of easier to relate to. And so
you're doing something. Yeah, it's concrete. Yeah.
Yeah, I would be horrified at trying to describe being a professional adult podcaster to my offspring personally. Not sure how to sell that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's such a tangible thing, and like you can actually see it. You can see whether you've succeeded or not, and that's great. Yeah.
So my last question for you, Nick, is you've set a few American records, and it sounds like you have intent to set a few more. I'm curious, like, as someone who really has done so much storytelling, emphasized your athletic growth later in life, what's next? And like, how do you feel about what's next?
So I actually only have set one American record, which is the 50K.
Well, okay, just the one. Well,
I am the world leader in the 50 mile. That's the other thing that's cool.
Nice.
For my age. What's next? So specifically what's next is the New York Marathon, which is the age group world championship. And that's in a few weeks. I've had a rough time coming off Tunnel Hill. I've had some knee pains and hamstring pains. So, I had initially thought I would run the New York Marathon and then the Tunnel Hill 100 and finally do a 100-mile race. But given the amount of given how hard it's been to recover, from Twisted Branch, I don't think that's wise. So I'll run the New York City Marathon, and then I will look for probably the 100K record in my new age group is doable. The 100-mile record is doable. I don't know. I'll try for some record, or I'll try for some distance I haven't run. But I'm definitely going to try to venture into the unknown, whether it's, running faster than I've run before. I mean, honestly, the record I'd love to set is the 50-mile record, because the record I was chasing the last few years was set by a 50-year-old. It's actually the record for both age categories. It was set by Ted Corbett, who ran 5:35 for 50 miles in 1970, right? And Ted Corbett he's one of the legends. He used to run 300 miles a week. He's on the U.S. Olympic team. He's a pioneer of race relations. Like, this is a record that stood for decades and decades. In a way, maybe you should let it last, like Ted Corbett. But I think he would appreciate like someone really going for it. And I went for it back at Lake Warramog. I ran a 50 miler, and I was on pace through 43, 44 miles, running exactly the splits I needed to run 5:35. And then I wasn't. But that's why the sport's hard. So maybe I'll try for that one again. Maybe I'll try again at Lake Warramog. I don't know.
I do want to bring it back to your book to finish up here. The book
that's
comes
great.
out.
Thank you very much. I'm appreciative of all efforts to say nice things about my book.
Oh yeah, we're here to move units. That's what we're doing.
Yes.
Thank you.
So the book, The Running Ground: A Father, a Son, and the Simplest of Sports, comes out October 28th. New York City Marathon is probably the next week. Is that coincidental? Do you have events planned? Is there anything around the marathon that you're doing with the book?
Yeah, so I definitely timed it to the marathon. Initially, I had thought I would time it to the Boston Marathon, and then got a little behind on my publishing, and so we moved it to October. But the thought was, when I set the pub date, it wasn't like, TCS is going to, promote the book. It was just like, this will be a good week to put it out in New York. But it comes out on Tuesday, the 28th. And then that night I do an event in DC. The next night I do an event in the 92nd Street Y. The next night I do another event in DC. And then I'm back. I'm doing an event with Nike. I think I'm going to do an event with the New York Roadrunners. I'll be doing an event at the Expo. So I'll probably be like getting the flu right before the race. But I hope I'll be signing lots of books and, meeting lots of interesting people in the week leading up. And then there'll also be a lot of runners in New York. So, ideally I won't be totally, as a former musician, I know that you never want to play before an empty room. So ideally there'll be some people at the 92nd Street Y.
Hey, one of those book events is, eventually you're going to have a book event that doesn't do very well. It's good. One of them has to be the worst, right? So.
Character building.
It's interesting. Like, I've played lots of concerts in my life, and I've definitely played before rooms where there are many more people than I expected. And sometimes I've had some rough nights too.
Yeah.
And I know that the thing is, you have to you bring your A game no matter what the audience is.
You have to perform. Yeah.
I do stand up. And once I had to do a show for a room of retirees who accidentally were bussed in and thought they were going to salsa night and were no longer at salsa night.
Oh, that's amazing.
Tough.
Yeah, that's I once played a concert where I was at CB's Gallery in New York, and I thought there were gonna be like 20, 30 people there, and I show up and there's like 200. I'm like, holy smokes. But it turned out that there was a cover band called Lil G&R, which was like 7-year-olds who looked like Axl and Slash with their hair playing Guns N' Roses covers.
Amazing.
And they like packed the house and like trashed it, and then like Lil G&R cleared out and like all my friends that showed up were like, what's going on, and left. So I was like left playing an empty room after little GNR.
After literal children.
Yeah.
Tough beat.
Yeah, it's tough.
I did a book event in Colorado the day after Trump was elected in 2016. It was a down.
Ooh.
Morale was low.
That was a, and right, because you didn't know, everybody was exhausted too, because you didn't know the election results until like midnight.
Yep.
Yeah.
One final question. Is there a scenario in which you would run a slow New York City marathon? I'm imagining like maybe one of your kids decides to run it, and maybe you're just like, okay, I'm not going to care about my time. I just want to get through this with my kid and see New York and eat some Halloween candy that spectators are handing out or whatever.
Yeah,
would that
probably.
be possible?
I think it is possible. I would certainly, like, if my son Zachary really wants to run the marathon, and if you were allowed to run it at age 15, there's an age limit of 18. He can't run it. So I would run it with him. But there's another scenario where like something happens in my life. So I had a kind of a role model, or someone I really looked up to, this guy named Alan Rubin, who, when I was sort of in my 30s, he was in his late 40s, and he was still running like mid 2:30 marathons, right? And I think he ran 20 consecutive New York marathons under 2:40. And he's just this phenomenally consistent runner. And then, he, in his, I think, mid 50s, maybe, he had a stroke, like a little stroke. And then he came back and he ran like, I don't know, 4:30, right? And he wrote that it was like the most meaningful New York marathon he'd ever run. And so, who knows what life brings? Like, who knows when like medical things happen? Who knows what happens? But you can imagine a scenario where it's not physically possible for me to keep, grinding out the same time. And the point becomes just like, can I actually run this race that I've, loved so much for so many years? And I would definitely, I can definitely see that happening. And like, maybe it's not a stroke, who knows? Like, it's entirely possible. Like, my hamstring flared up. I had like a little nerve issue with my hamstring. Like, I'm old. This stuff happens. I had to like stop running and like walk home from just a run on Saturday. It's the first time I had to walk home. I've had to walk home after races where I've blown myself up, but never in a run in like since 31 years. Right. So maybe this cycle will just go to hell, and like, I'll just be jogging out there. So I don't know.
The only two things that can slow Nick Thompson down are traumatic brain injury and personal growth. Let's just keep our fingers crossed neither happens.
Yeah. Thank you, Zoe, for illuminating that point and clarifying, giving me a much quicker answer than I could have given just now to Brendan.
I finished in 5:30, but I'm a much bigger person.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Nick. Your book, The Running Ground, is out today. Be sure to check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Thanks for joining us on the Trailhead. If you love this episode, leave us a review. Share it with your trail crew and make sure to subscribe so you never miss an adventure. Give us a follow on Instagram at TrailheadPod. And you can reach us anytime at trailhead@ultrasignup.com. We'd love to hear your stories, questions, guest ideas, or just to say hi. And don't forget to check out all of the shows in the Ultra Podcast Network. We're building something special, and it's just for you. We'll see you every other week, right here on the Trailhead.